Welcome back to PlotFall. Settle in as we gently explore the history of why you wouldn't survive a day as a Viking raider. Before we begin, if you find value in these stories, perhaps take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps others find the channel. You can also let me know in the comments where you're listening from and the time. It's always fascinating to see our quiet community grow around the world. Now, find a comfortable position, perhaps dim the lights, or turn on a soft fan for background noise, and let's ease into tonight's story together. Perhaps when you think of a Viking raider, an image flickers in your mind. Maybe it's the broad-shouldered warrior, axe glinting, sailing across stormy seas towards glory and plunder. You picture strength, courage, a life unbound by everyday worries, filled with adventure on distant shores. It's a powerful, romantic picture painted by sagas and modern tales, isn't it? A life of bold freedom. But let's take a gentle breath and look a little closer at that image. Peel back just the first layer. Because the reality of daily life for one of these individuals was, well, astonishingly harsh and deeply, deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't just about the thrilling raid. It was about surviving the endless grinding periods between the fighting, the sheer physical reality of existing in that time. Imagine the constant damp chill clinging to your rough wool tunic, the pervasive smell of wet dog, stale sweat, and wood smoke that never truly left you. The feel of splinters in your calloused hands from rough-hewn oars or ship timbers. The simple, unavoidable fact that bathing was a rare luxury, leaving a lingering aroma that would certainly challenge modern sensibilities. Your diet was monotonous, often meager, a far cry from any feast depicted in legend. Sleep came on hard benches or damp ground, often interrupted by the ship's roll or the biting wind. This wasn't a life of glamorous freedom. It was a constant battle against the elements, against hunger, against disease, long before you ever faced a human enemy. It was the relentless, unsung hardship that truly defined the day-to-day existence. Calloused hands from rough-hewn oars or ship timbers. The simple, unavoidable fact that bathing was a rare luxury, leaving a lingering aroma that would certainly challenge modern sensibilities. Your diet was monotonous, often meager, a far cry from any feast depicted in legend. Sleep came on hard benches or damp ground, often interrupted by the ship's roll or the biting wind. This wasn't a life of glamorous freedom. It was a constant battle against the elements, against hunger, against disease, long before you ever faced a human enemy. It was the relentless, unsung hardship that truly defined the day-to-day existence. Imagine for a moment waking not in your soft bed, but on rough planks, perhaps slick with sea spray or last night's meager meal residue. The air bites with a damp cold that seems to seep into your very bones, a chill no amount of rough wool layers quite banishes. Your muscles already ache from the previous day's exertion, rowing, hauling, or just bracing against the endless motion of the ship. You notice the pervasive scent, a mixture of brine, pitch, and many unwashed bodies packed close together. There's no hot drink to ease the chill, no warm shower to start the day fresh. Your breakfast is likely hardtack, maybe dried fish, tough and salty, needing endless chewing with teeth already worn from grit and poor diet. The water is lukewarm and tastes faintly of the wooden barrel it came from, perhaps even a little sour. There's no moment of quiet contemplation or ease. The work begins immediately. Hauling ropes thick and stiff with salt, endlessly bailing water, or taking up an oar that feels heavier than any weight you've ever lifted. Every surface you touch is rough, worn, or splintered. Your clothes are stiff and scratchy against your skin. A minor cut or scrape, easily shrugged off today, becomes a potential source of serious infection in a world without antiseptics. The simple truth is, a day in this life isn't about adventure. It's about enduring a level of physical discomfort, poor hygiene, and relentless labor that would exhaust and likely break most of us before the sun even began its descent. It was a test of pure, brutal resilience, moment by moment, Imagine, for a moment, peeling your eyes open not to sunlight filtering through modern blinds, but to the gray, smoky gloom of a longhouse interior. Your bed is perhaps a rough-hewn plank or a pile of straw, scratchy and cold, likely alive with fleas you can only feel, not see. The air hangs heavy and damp, carrying the sharp, mingled scents of wood smoke, animal hides, stale food, and bodies that haven't known true cleanliness in weeks, maybe months. This world has no soft edges, no gentle comforts we take for granted. Step outside, and there are no paved paths, no streetlights, no sense of guaranteed security. Every day is a negotiation with harsh elements, potential dangers lurking just beyond the firelight, and the ever-present threat of illness spreading like wildfire through cramped, unsanitary communities. Food isn't a supermarket aisle away. It's the product of back-breaking labor, uncertain harvests, or perilous hunts. Fresh, safe water is a constant concern. Even simple injuries could be life-threatening without any understanding of germs or effective medicine. Survival wasn't a given. It was a relentless, grinding effort, punctuated by moments of raw fear and chilling uncertainty. The vast, invisible safety net we live within now simply wasn't there then. You were utterly exposed to the world's indifference, dependent entirely on your own toughness, a large measure of luck, and the fragile bonds of your small group. It was a life lived perpetually on the brink, where the simplest things, like staying warm or finding enough to eat, were monumental daily challenges. That relentless grinding effort wasn't just a possibility. For many throughout history, it was simply life. Stepping further back in time, into the world that forged figures we now call Vikings, this baseline of hardship wasn't just present, it was arguably intensified by climate and sheer isolation. Imagine trading your comfortable bed, your heated home, your endless access to clean water and varied food for something utterly alien. Your shelter wouldn't offer much refuge. Think thick, rough walls of earth or wood, chinked with mud and moss, doing little to keep out the biting chill that seemed to seep into your very bones night and day. The air inside would be heavy, with the constant smell of wood smoke from the central hearth, animal hides, unwashed bodies packed together for warmth, and the damp, earthy scent rising from the floor. Light would be scarce, just the flickering lamplight mixing with the weak, smoky glow filtering down from the vent in the roof. Even the simplest needs were met with a brutal efficiency, not comfort. Your clothes? Likely coarse, itchy wool that held the smells of your environment and offered some protection against the cold, but little softness. Your food? Far from the supermarket aisles, you know. Perhaps a thin, often cold porridge or a piece of dried, tough meat, if you were lucky enough that day. The constant underlying hunger, the dull ache of needing more, would be your quiet, persistent companion. This wasn't about thriving. It was about enduring, just making it through the day in a world that offered no cushion, no safety net, and demanded everything simply to survive. This raw, unforgiving existence was the crucible. And from that raw, unforgiving existence, let's drift softly towards another facet of this ancient world, perhaps one you've heard tales of, but rarely felt the true reality of. Imagine stepping into a day, not just surviving, but poised on the edge of journeys across the waves. Prepare to step softly into a past where the very air felt profoundly different, heavier with the scent of salt, the sharp tang of the endless sea biting at your nostrils, mingling with the thick, comforting, yet often acrid smell of wood smoke from village fires or the pitch used on boats. This wasn't just the scent of nature. It was the atmosphere of lives lived close to the bone. Feel the perpetual dampness clinging to your rough wool tunic. Hear the distant, lonely cries of gulls overhead, or the low murmur of voices in a language you barely understand. It's a constant symphony of the elements and human effort. Perhaps you stand by the water's edge, the cold, wet sand seeping through the gaps in your rough boots, watching the iconic longships bob gently, their silent dragonheads facing the uncertain horizon. Or perhaps you are already aboard, the creak and groan of the wooden hull beneath you, a constant lullaby, the strong scent of tar and wood around you as the boat shifts with the gentle pull of the tide. The cold spray might occasionally lash your face, a sharp reminder of the element's constant presence and power. Every breath here is a mix of the natural world and the human world, blended with the quiet anticipation of what the sea might bring. This was not a world designed for ease. To simply exist within its essence tells a story of resilience, exposure, and the profound physical challenge of simply enduring its demands, hour after hour. Enduring its demands, hour after hour. But the sea was only one part of their world. Imagine leaving that gentle rocking boat, setting foot back onto the land they called home. This wasn't a land of easy living. No lush, fertile plains, stretching endlessly under a warm sun. Think, instead of dramatic fjords slicing deep into the earth, cliffs rising steeply like giant teeth, picture dense, dark forests clinging to rocky slopes, where the sunlight barely penetrates the canopy and the air is perpetually cool and damp, smelling of pine needles and wet earth. Winters here were long, dark, and brutal. The ground freezes hard, the winds howl down from the mountains, carrying sleet and snow. The cold seeps into everything, into the rough wool tunics, into the single-room houses, into the very bones of the people living here. Farming was a constant struggle on the poor soil. It demanded back-breaking labor for meager yields of tough barley or root vegetables. Livestock was precious, often small and hardy breeds, huddled close for warmth. Every resource had to be fought for. Every scrap of food a hard-won victory against the unforgiving land. This harsh reality wasn't just background noise. It was the forge that shaped their lives, their resilience, their very outlook. Survival wasn't a given. It was an active, daily effort, born from facing down frost, hunger, and the sheer difficulty of coaxing life from rock and ice. It made raiding, with its promise of easier wealth and food from softer lands, perhaps seem not just appealing, but almost necessary for some. Yet for most, life wasn't lived on the waves or in distant lands. It was lived right here, on the unforgiving land, beneath the vast, often gray, Scandinavian sky. Imagine waking not to the call of adventure, but to the familiar ache in your bones from yesterday's labor. Your day wasn't spent honing battle skills, but coaxing stubborn grain from thin soil, its tiny roots clinging precariously to rock and peat. The smell of wet earth, mixed with the salty tang carried on the wind, was your constant companion. If not farming, perhaps you'd be mending fishing nets by the shore, fingers numb from the chill even in summer, or gutting the day's meager catch, the slick scales and briny smell clinging to your hands. Crafting was a necessity, not a hobby. You'd spend hours shaping wood with simple tools, spinning scratchy wool into yarn by hand, or hammering iron, precious iron, into a basic hinge or knife. Food was rarely plentiful. It was likely endless variations of gruel, dried fish, or root vegetables, the taste a monotonous, earthy reassurance of mere sustenance. There were no markets bursting with exotic goods here, only the fruits of your own, backbreaking labor, shared within the small community. This was the quiet, often brutal reality for most. This quiet, often brutal reality for most meant that simply existing wasn't always enough. Survival was a constant struggle, but there was also the relentless pressure of a society built on hierarchy, on reputation, on asterisk things. Land was finite, farming yielded only so much, and trading was a slow, often dangerous way to accumulate significant wealth or gain respect from your peers. To truly rise, to secure your family's future and escape the endless backbreaking drudgery, you needed something more. This is where the call of the waves, the lure of the longship began to whisper. Raiding offered a terrifying yet potent alternative. It was a high-stakes gamble, a voyage into the unknown across cold gray seas, but it held the promise of plunder, of silver arm rings, fine cloth, or even enslaved people. Goods that could instantly elevate your status back home in ways years of farming never could. The decision to join a raiding crew wasn't just about adventure. It was often born of necessity, a desperate bid to break free from the suffocating limits of your ordinary life. You'd stand on the shore, perhaps smelling the salt and tar of the waiting ship, knowing the journey ahead was fraught with peril, but the potential reward, the sheer chance to become someone of standing, felt like the only real hope in a world that offered so little. Okay, so you've joined the raid, hoping for wealth and status. But it wasn't just about the glint of silver you might find tucked away in a chest. Much of your worth, your future, the respect you earned back home, depended almost entirely on your reputation. Were you brave in the face of danger? Were you skilled with your axe or sword? Did you stand firm, shield to shield, when others wavered or fled? These weren't abstract ideas. They were tangible currency in this world. A good name meant you'd be chosen for the next, potentially more lucrative raid, perhaps get a better share of the spoils, maybe even attract a favorable marriage, or gain more influence in the community hall. This intense, burning focus on personal glory meant that battle wasn't just a chaotic clash of forces. It was a brutal stage for individual performance. You weren't simply fighting for the chieftain or the crew. You were fighting, perhaps most fiercely, for your own story, the saga that would be whispered or sung around the longhouse fire back home. And those tales, to be worth telling and remembering, needed heroes, individuals who performed feats of courage that would echo through the years. This constant societal pressure could lead to incredible, almost superhuman acts of bravery, yes, but also to desperate, even suicidal charges into the enemy line. Imagine standing there, the cold weight of your shield heavy on your arm, the din of battle roaring around you, seeing your comrades fall or retreat, but knowing instinctively, deep in your bones, that turning your back now meant not just losing the fight, but losing everything, facing utter shame, never living down the label of cowardice. The fear of dishonor, the dread of having your name spat upon, might have been a far colder, more paralyzing fear than the sharp prospect of death itself. Your mind, rooted in the comfort and anonymity of our modern world, would likely buckle under the weight of this ancient expectation. And beyond the cold dread of being shamed, there was another layer to their survival mindset, something that would feel alien to our modern selves. Their world was deeply woven with belief in gods, powerful beings who watched over the harsh realities of life. Imagine for a moment truly believing that dying honorably in battle wasn't an end, but a glorious transition. Their faith promised a place like Valhalla, the great hall of Odin, a feasting place for warriors slain bravely in combat. To die with a weapon in your hand, falling amidst the clash of steel and the roars of your comrades, meant potentially being chosen to join the ranks of the Einherjar, those perpetually feasting and fighting, preparing for the final epic battle at Ragnarok. The thought of Valhalla, perhaps echoing with the sounds of perpetual revelry and practice combat, offered a stark contrast to the cold, gloomy realm of Helheim, where those who died from sickness, old age, or what they considered an inglorious end might go. This belief system, this genuine hope for a warrior's paradise, could perhaps lessen the terror of death itself. It offered a purpose beyond mere survival in the immediate moment. You might step onto that bloody field, knowing that even if you fell, the greatest honor awaited you, a seat among heroes, welcomed by the All-Father himself. This fundamental difference in facing mortality, seeing death not as the absolute end to be feared above all else, but as a potential gateway to eternal glory, is perhaps the most profound barrier between your gentle world and theirs. The thought of eternal glory, of feasting in Odin's hall, might fuel the dreams of a young Norseman hoping to make his mark. But reaching the battlefield or the distant shore where such a destiny could be forged wasn't a matter of joining a grand army with banners and muster rolls. No, the life of a potential raider began much closer to home, often with far rougher edges and fewer guarantees than you might imagine. You wouldn't be handed a uniform or assigned to a unit upon some formal enlistment. Instead, you had to prove yourself constantly in the eyes of local leaders. Chieftains, powerful farmers, men with established reputations for battle. Think of it as a continuous, silent audition, measured not by paperwork, but by deeds. Strength was undeniably crucial. Yes, the ability to wield an axe or spear with competence, to row for hours, to endure bitter cold and hunger. But perhaps even more vital was demonstrating unwavering loyalty, raw fierceness when challenged, and a willingness to follow orders absolutely, no matter how brutal or perilous the task. Imagine standing on the edge of a tense gathering, hoping desperately to catch the eye of a grizzled chieftain, his face weathered like ancient driftwood, his gaze sharp and assessing. Becoming part of a successful raiding crew wasn't about formal recruitment. It was about being personally chosen. The chieftain needed men he could trust implicitly when far from home. Men who wouldn't falter under crushing pressure. Men who understood the brutal, unwritten rules of loyalty, shared risk, and the division of plunder. You weren't simply signing up for adventure on a whim. You were hoping to be deemed worthy of inclusion into a very tight, often unforgiving family unit. This informal, intensely personal selection process meant that the crews who actually set sail upon the waves were rarely random collections. They were groups bound by hard-earned reputation, proven grit, and the chieftain's deeply considered assessment of their potential. But where did this incredible physical resilience come from? It wasn't from dedicated gym sessions or structured workout plans as we know them. No. The fundamental strength and endurance of a Viking-age person were forged in the relentless, everyday rhythm of simply staying alive. From the time they were small children, hands were put to work, learning skills and building stamina through constant, demanding activity. Imagine yourself as a young person in a settlement. There were fields to plow, often rocky and unforgiving, demanding immense core and back strength. You'd haul heavy stones for building, fell trees with rough axes designed for function over comfort, and split wood until your hands were raw and calloused, developing a grip like iron. Water wasn't piped conveniently indoors. It was carried, pail by pail, from the nearest stream or well, often over uneven, muddy ground, through wind and weather, building powerful legs and shoulders. Every task, from mending fences in the biting wind to preparing animal hides or helping repair a boat, demanded sustained physical effort. Your muscles were constantly engaged, growing strong not through targeted exercises for specific muscle groups, but through the sheer, unavoidable necessity of daily life's labor from dawn till dusk. This wasn't about looking fit. It was about possessing a deep, ingrained toughness, a body hardened by constant exposure and exertion, utterly unlike one built in the relative comfort of the modern world. To survive the brutal rigors of raiding, you first had to simply survive the unrelenting physical demands of childhood and adolescence in the Viking Age. And that, for most of us today, would be the impossible first step. And if your body somehow survived the harsh realities of daily life, the next hurdle was the training. This wasn't about learning complex martial arts forms or studying intricate tactical diagrams. Survival in Viking combat hinged on a brutal simplicity, an instinctual understanding of how to inflict maximum damage with basic, powerful tools. You'd spend countless hours simply swinging, thrusting, and hacking, the feel of the rough wood of an axe handle becoming an extension of your own hand, the solid weight of the metal head, a familiar burden on your shoulder. Or perhaps the long reach of a spear, learning not fancy parries, but the most direct, bone-shattering way to pierce skin and bone. Swords, when available, demanded a different kind of brutal efficiency. Not fencing, but powerful, cleaving strokes. Training was repetition, sweat, and the occasional painful blow. It was the dull thud of practice axes against wooden shields, the scrape of whetstones against steel or iron, the tired ache in your arms after hours of drilling the same simple, deadly movements. Your body wasn't being taught graceful combat. It was being forged into a blunt, effective instrument designed to deliver devastating force with minimum wasted effort, a stark, simple dance of death. After honing your body into a blunt, effective tool, the mind also needed tempering, perhaps even more so. Pain wasn't a sign of failure here. It was almost just expected. A dull ache settling deep from old wounds, the sharp, searing sting of a fresh cut received in training or battle. You learned to push past it, to function through discomfort. Scars weren't something to hide in this world. Perhaps, in time, they became a map of your journey, etched onto your very skin, a testament to what you had endured. And violence? It wasn't an abstract concept discussed far away or viewed safely from a distance. It was immediate, personal, and often horrifyingly necessary, dealt with your own hand or witnessed mere feet away. You needed to be ready, not just to do violence, but to witness it, up close. To see life extinguished in an instant, to hear the sharp crack of bone, the desperate cry, the sudden gurgle of blood, and then keep going, the practical demands of survival overriding everything else. This wasn't a game. It was a brutal necessity, painted in stark, often gruesome detail. Death was a constant companion in this life, never far away. It hovered over every sea voyage, every raid on distant shores, every harsh winter back home. You'd see fallen comrades, their faces pale and still against the mud or the blood-soaked deck of a longship. You'd see enemies, their eyes wide with final shock or empty of light. The smell of death, coppery and sweet on the wind after a conflict, would be something you knew intimately. It wasn't glamorous. It was the grim reality woven into the fabric of this existence. To thrive or simply survive another day, you had to accept this constant proximity, this chilling, unsettling familiarity with the end. Beyond the grim reality of the voyage itself, beyond the constant proximity to death, was the quiet, often unseen effort of preparing for one. Setting sail wasn't a solo venture for a single powerful jarl. It was a community calling, a gathering of faces you knew intimately, brothers, cousins, neighbors, who lived just down the muddy track from your own dwelling. You looked into their eyes and saw a shared fate reflected there. Your skill with an axe or your strength at the oar was as vital as the man beside you, the one mending the sail or checking the stores. This wasn't just partnership in battle. It was a life-or-death reliance, a silent vow of trust exchanged before a word was spoken about the destination. The air would fill with the sharp, comforting smell of pine tar being reapplied to the longship's hull, sealing out the unforgiving sea, mingling with the scent of salt and damp wood. The sound of mallets on planks, the creak of ropes tightening under tension, the rough feel of the sailcloth against your hands as you patched a tear or secured a lashing. Every task, from sharpening weapons to packing dried fish and hardtack, was performed with a focused, quiet intensity. There was a stillness about these preparations, a shared, unspoken recognition that not everyone who helped lash down the cargo would return to unload it. You saw it in the set of Jaws, the focused gazes across the bustling shore. This foundation of mutual trust and shared labor, built on land over countless days of living and working together, was the fragile vessel you climbed into. You hoped it, and the people within it, bound by this quiet understanding of risk and reliance, would indeed carry you through the storm. You step over the low gunwale, your boot landing with a soft dearest on the wooden planks of the deck. It feels solid, Yet immediately you sense the gentle, perpetual sway of the water beneath. This isn't like standing on firm earth. The world shifts subtly, constantly. The deck itself is worn smooth in places by countless feet, perhaps rough and splintered in others, sticky with residual pitch used to seal the seams, or slick with recent sea spray. Immediately the wind is on you, not a gentle breeze, but the open, unhindered wind of the sea, tugging at your clothes, whistling past your ears. Look up. There is no roof here, no enclosed cabin, nothing but the vast, indifferent dome of the sky stretching from horizon to horizon. Feel the salt spray on your face, taste it on your lips. Inhale the deep, resonant smell of the sea, sharp and clean, mingled with the warm, comforting scent of tarred wood, and perhaps the lingering odor of dried fish or wet leather. This open boat, this slender hull, is your home now. For days, maybe weeks, you are utterly exposed to the elements. Rain will fall directly on you. The sun will beat down relentlessly, wind will chap your skin. There's a simple sail, perhaps a rough canvas sheet that can be rigged sometimes for a touch of respite from the worst downpours. But mostly, you are simply down there, curled up on the deck to sleep, using your shield as a makeshift blanket. The rhythm of the waves a constant companion, sometimes a gentle slap-slap, sometimes a booming crash. It's a raw, unending negotiation with the sea and the sky. Moving from the endless rhythm of the waves, let's step back for a moment, right to the very beginning of one of these long, demanding voyages. Imagine the ship, heavy and proud, resting not on the sea, but on the shore, maybe nestled high on the sand, or perhaps sitting on a few carefully placed wooden rollers, waiting for the signal. It's a beautiful vessel, certainly, crafted with skill and intention, its carved prow gazing seaward. But standing there, dwarfing the figures around it, it is also incredibly, imposingly heavy. Launching this magnificent wooden beast was no simple matter of hoisting a sail and pushing off gently. Not at all. This was brute force, raw muscle, and coordinated effort on a monumental scale. You would line up alongside dozens of others, gripping the cold, damp wood of the hull, maybe near the keel, maybe higher up on the side. Your feet sinking slightly into the wet sand near the water's edge, feeling the chill seep upwards. The air would smell not just of salt, but also of damp timber and the bracing, sometimes biting chill of the sea wind coming off the waves. On a shouted command, everyone would heave together. A low, collective groan might rise from the straining wood, and certainly from the throats of the raiders pushing with all their might. You push, shoulders aching, back muscles burning, trying to get this massive weight to budge even an inch. The waves lap around your ankles, then your calves, icy cold and pulling against you, making the sand shift precariously underfoot. Grit grinds underfoot, potentially scraping your skin. You strain again, feeling the enormous, stubborn resistance of the ship against the sand and gravity. Slowly, painstakingly, inch by painful inch, the hull scrapes forward, groaning in protest. The logs underneath might roll slightly, offering a tiny bit of mechanical advantage, but mostly it's sheer, combined human power applied relentlessly. You push until your lungs burn, until sweat mixes with the sea spray on your face, until your hands are raw and scraped from gripping the rough wood. This immense physical exertion, just to get afloat, was the absolute beginning of the journey. It set the stage for the relentless physical demands that lay ahead, long before you ever felt the true, deep roll of the open sea. It required strength and endurance you might find hard to imagine possessing today. With the ship finally pushed free of the shore, your arms already ache from the initial heave. But that was just the beginning. Because while these graceful longships did indeed have sails, much of the journey, especially against adverse winds or simply for steady progress, depended on a different kind of power, the raw, enduring strength of the rowers. You settle onto the hard bench, one of maybe 30 or 40 pairs of hands gripping the rough wood of an oar. The coxswain calls the rhythm, a steady, demanding beat, and you pull. The oar dips into the cool water with a soft splash, biting deep, and you heave back with your entire body. The boat surges forward slightly, then dips as the oars on the other side pull. There's a low, constant groaning sound of wood against wood where the oars are held, a creaking symphony of exertion. Hour after hour passes in this relentless cycle. Pull, push forward. Pull, push forward. The horizon seems fixed, mocking your effort. Your hands grow raw, sometimes blistering beneath calluses you already thought were tough. Sweat trickles down your temples, tasting sharply of salt as it mixes with the occasional fine spray lifted by the wind. The soundscape is dominated by the rhythmic dip and pull of the oars. The heavy breathing of the men around you, maybe a low, repetitive chant to help maintain the pace. Days could blur into one another like this, the world outside the ship becoming a hazy backdrop to the consuming, repetitive motion. There's no comfort, no escape from the aching muscles and the demanding rhythm. It was a test of endurance, not just strength, a quiet, grueling marathon measured stroke by weary stroke across the vast, indifferent sea. This wasn't the stuff of glorious sagas, perhaps, but the quiet, constant reality of Viking travel. But sometimes, if the wind was feeling kind, you might trade the ache of the oars for a different kind of battle. Up goes the mast, and then, hoisted high, a single, immense square sail. Imagine it. A vast rectangle of thick wool or woven linen, patched perhaps, stained with salt and spray, catching the wind like a giant kite, pulling the ship forward. There's a wild beauty to it. The deep thrumming sound as the canvas fills, the sudden surge of speed. But it's no time for rest. That sail is demanding, a living thing in the wind's fickle embrace. Every subtle shift in direction, every gust, every moment the wind strength changes, requires your attention. You're hauling on thick, often wet ropes, constantly trimming the sail, adjusting its angle, working to keep it full, and the ship on course. This isn't a task for the weak or the distracted. A sudden squall can hit without much warning, demanding immediate, brutal effort to wrestle the sail into submission before it tears or the mast snaps. Your hands are raw from the ropes, the sea spray is a constant chill, and the wind seems to mock you with its ceaseless variations. It's a relentless negotiation with the elements, trading the steady ache of rowing for the sharp, unpredictable demands of the sail, hour after weary hour across the open, unforgiving waves. You aren't just battling the sea physically with your muscles. You are also battling it mentally, constantly trying to make sense of its immense, shifting surface. Because there were no neat paper charts here, no comforting glow of a digital screen guiding your way across the endless blue. Your compass, your map, your very survival depended on your ability to read the world itself, the sky above you and the water around you. By day, you watched the sun make its patient arc across the heavens, estimating direction from its angle relative to the mast and the ship's heading. By night, you relied on the familiar constellations, a celestial map known by heart, passed down through whispered stories across generations. But it was much more than just sun and stars. It was feeling the subtle, shifting rhythm of the waves against the hull, understanding their story, where they had come from, what they might tell you about distant land or hidden obstacles beneath the surface. It was watching the seabirds, their silent, instinctive flight paths, a living compass leading towards land you couldn't yet see or smell. This wasn't just knowledge learned from a book or a quick lesson. It was etched into the very fiber of your being, a deep, intuitive wisdom honed over a lifetime under the open sky and on the restless water. One wrong read of the sky or the waves, a sudden, persistent fog that hid the sun and stars for days, and you weren't just a little off course. You were truly, terrifyingly lost, swallowed by the vast, cold indifference of the open ocean. It demanded a constant, humble attention, a lifetime of watching, listening, feeling, a profound, quiet trust in the ancient, subtle language of the world around you. Your life and the lives of everyone aboard hung on this silent, fragile conversation with nature. But the sea, she had other languages too. Languages of sudden fury, of raw, untamed power. One moment you might be gliding relatively smoothly across gray swells, reading the subtle shift in the wind, feeling the gentle roll beneath you. The next, a darkness would devour the horizon, a bruised purple-gray that promised violence. The wind wouldn't just shift. It would leap upon you without warning, shrieking through the simple square sail, tearing at the ropes, lashing your face with sudden freezing spray. Waves that were moments ago merely rolling hills transformed into monstrous jagged peaks of cold, dark water. These weren't gentle swells. They were crushing walls that crashed over the low sides of the longship. The open deck offered absolutely no shelter, instantly becoming a churning, dangerous mess of icy water and struggling bodies. Every man was needed, not for rowing or sailing, but for constant, desperate bailing, trying to scoop the relentless influx of water back over the side with wooden buckets or simple leather scoops, though it poured back in faster than you could work. You would be soaked through in seconds, the heavy wool clothing offering little protection against the deep, penetrating cold. Salt spray would sting your eyes, the wind would steal your breath, and the constant, violent pitching of the boat would churn your stomach, leaving no comfort, no dry spot, no moment of peace. There was no escape, nowhere to hide. You were simply there, utterly exposed, clinging to whatever handhold you could find, your muscles aching, your hands numb. This wasn't about strategy or courage. It was about sheer, brute survival, praying that the tough oak planks beneath you wouldn't split, that the mast wouldn't snap, that the next towering wave wouldn't finally overwhelm this fragile shell against the unforgiving power of the ocean. The fury of the storm might pass, but the wetness? Ah, that was a constant companion, a lingering guest who refused to leave. Your clothes, heavy wool perhaps, would cling to your skin, perpetually damp, never truly drying out. That constant clammy feeling. It was a relentless discomfort, a subtle chill that wasn't just on the surface but seemed to sink deep into your bones, right to the core. Shivering wasn't just from the bite of the air, but from a penetrating cold that the dampness seemed to amplify and hold on to, making your fingers ache and your toes feel perpetually numb. Imagine trying to find rest. Even if you found shelter, the air inside was thick with humidity, the floor often muddy or just plain wet. Your sleeping surface, maybe a pile of damp straw or just a cold, hard bench, offered little respite. You'd huddle, perhaps wrapped in a damp blanket, trying to share warmth with others, but the dampness seemed to leach it away as quickly as you generated it. That pervasive smell of wet wool, salt spray, and perhaps a hint of mildew or smoky damp wood. It filled your nostrils, a constant, heavy reminder of your state. This persistent damp wasn't just unpleasant. It was a quiet, persistent adversary, a constant drain on your energy, making muscles ache and stiff, making sleep restless and broken. True warmth, true dryness, true relaxation. They were luxuries you rarely knew. The wet, always there, seeping into everything. The dampness was one thing, but finding a space to even 20 damp was another challenge entirely. Forget anything resembling a bed or private bunk. Your nights were spent on the hard, rough-hewn planks of the ship's deck, open to the elements and shared with essentially everyone else aboard. There was no escaping the crowd. You'd find a spot, maybe near the mast or along the side, and try to arrange a simple animal hide, perhaps a sheepskin or reindeer pelt, smelling faintly of lanolin and sea spray, between your body and the unforgiving wood. These hides offered little in the way of padding, merely a thin, often rough barrier against the splintered planks and the bone-chilling cold that seemed to radiate up from the hull. Then came the press of bodies. You weren't sleeping alone. You are part of a tightly packed mass of weary men, huddled together for warmth, each movement jostling your neighbors. The air grew thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and the ever-present scent of the sea and tar. Sleep was a matter of finding a curve in your body that fit against someone else's, enduring the occasional sharp elbow or heavy snore, and trying to ignore the hard reality of the wood beneath you. It wasn't restful in any modern sense, but a state of uncomfortable, intermittent unconsciousness, punctuated by the ship's creaks and groans, the lapping of waves, and the cold, damp air. You awaken from that uncomfortable, intermittent sleep, the ship still groaning beneath you, the gentle bobbing a constant presence. Your body aches in places you didn't know existed, and your stomach, well, it reminds you that sleep wasn't the only hardship. Now comes the matter of food. Forget any thoughts of warm porridge or fresh bread. At sea, meals were simple, practical, and deeply monotonous. Picture a piece of meat or fish laid before you. It's been heavily salted or dried, looking less like food and more like a leathery brown strip that feels stiff and unyielding in your hand. You have to gnaw at it, the salt sharp on your tongue, the texture dry and tough. Then there are the biscuits, hardtack. These aren't soft, floury creations. They are dense, baked-to-stone discs, designed purely for longevity. You might have to dunk one in your drink just to soften it enough to chew without risking a tooth. It tastes of flour and the long passage of time, utterly devoid of any richness or comfort. Your drink is likely water from a cask, perhaps tasting a little stale, or a weak, watery ale if you're fortunate. There's no sweet fruit or fresh milk here, just basic liquid to wash down the dry, briny fare. Day after day, it's this same unvarying diet, dried protein and hardened carbohydrate. It's sustenance, yes, enough to keep you going, but it's a stark, comfortless nutrition, reflecting the harsh reality of life on the waves. Every bite is a reminder that you are far from home, far from ease, surviving on the bare minimum. Your throat feels parched from that dry, salty meal, a craving for something truly quenching. But on this long voyage, fresh water is perhaps the most precious commodity of all. Every drop carefully measured, painstakingly collected from the last shore, and stored in heavy wooden casks lashed securely to the deck. Imagine those casks, smelling faintly of old wood, and the slow, still water held within. This isn't sparkling spring water. It's water that has sat for days, perhaps weeks, growing stale and losing any hint of freshness. The taste is flat, lifeless, maybe even a little sour, carrying the ghosts of everything that has settled within the wood or brewed silently in the darkness. There might be a faint smell, not exactly foul yet, but stagnant. You take a sip, trying to ignore the lack of crispness, willing it to be enough. But the real danger lurks unseen. Within those wooden walls, bacteria can multiply. A drink that seems fine one moment could be carrying the seeds of debilitating illness. The dreaded flux, relentless vomiting and diarrhea, is a constant terrifying threat at sea. Dehydration follows swiftly, and on a longship far from land, there is no help, no medicine. Every time you lift the heavy dipper to your lips, you're making a quiet gamble. Is this sip safe, or will it bring sickness that could end your journey and your life here on the waves? It's a daily act of desperate trust in lukewarm, weary water. But what if the gamble didn't pay off? What if that sip of water, or perhaps something you ate, sends a cold shiver through you, followed by a deep, unsettling ache? As the longship cuts through the waves, far from any shore, you quickly realize a terrifying truth. This wooden vessel, crammed with warriors, is not a place of healing. There is no physician here, no soothing salves, no carefully prepared medicines. If sickness takes hold, you are largely on your own. You might feel the world tilt sickeningly, hear the groan of the timbers through a haze of fever. Taste the metallic tang of illness rising in your throat. Your companions can offer little beyond a sympathetic glance, maybe a splash of cold water on your forehead from a rough leather bucket. Any remedies would be simple. Perhaps an old herb wife's poultice passed down through generations, crudely applied with uncertain effect. And injury? A misstep in rough seas, a splinter from the worn wood, a cut from a blade during training. These things happen. But here, a simple wound can become a death sentence. Imagine a deep gash. There's no skilled hand to stitch it cleanly, no antiseptic wash to keep infection at bay. The rough linen used for bandages might carry unseen dangers of its own. You simply endure the throbbing pain, the rising heat around the wound, and hope desperately that your body is strong enough to fight off whatever nastiness might enter. It is a quiet, grim test of pure endurance, miles from any comfort or real help. A quiet, grim test of pure endurance, miles from any comfort or real help. But the world itself presented its own relentless challenges to staying alive and healthy. Imagine for a moment not just tending a wound without antiseptic, but simply existing in a place where our modern understanding of cleanliness wasn't just absent, it was unimaginable. The air you breathed inside a longhouse would be thick with stale wood smoke, the scent of damp wool and leather, and the earthy smell of unwashed bodies pressed close together. Step outside, and the smells wouldn't improve much. There'd be the tang of wood ash from fires, the ever-present scent of animal dung from livestock kept nearby, and the pervasive dampness of the northern climate clinging to everything. Sanitation as we know it simply didn't exist. Waste management was rudimentary at best. Personal bathing was far from a daily ritual, often more about specific occasions than simple hygiene. This constant exposure to dirt, microbes, and lack of sanitation meant that everyday life was a tightrope walk across a chasm of invisible dangers. A scratch, a bruise, a cough, a bite of slightly spoiled food. Any of these could, and often would, escalate into a serious, potentially fatal infection or illness. There were no antibiotics, no understanding of germs, just the sheer resilience of the human body against overwhelming odds. The simple act of breathing, of eating, of touching something. It was a constant negotiation with unseen threats, a daily reminder of how fragile life was in a world that was fundamentally, relentlessly, unclean by our standards. Yes, and carrying that thought forward. Imagine life compressed into an even smaller, more confined space, where those unclean standards were simply the air you breathed, the ground beneath your feet, moment by moment. Step aboard a Viking longship, not in your imagination as a grand, sweeping adventure, but as a damp, crowded reality for weeks or months at a time. This was a world where cleanliness was a concept utterly foreign to the daily grind. The most immediate and inescapable thing on board wouldn't be the spray of the waves or the creak of the mast, but the smell. It was a deep, pervasive scent, clinging to everything and everyone with tenacious certainty. Think first of the sharp, bracing salt, yes, but mixed thick with the metallic tang of yesterday's fish catch left too long on the deck under a warm sun. Beneath that, the heavy, earthy smell of damp wood, perpetually saturated from spray, rain, and condensation below deck. And then the deeply human smells that could never truly be aired out. Unwashed bodies, packed together tightly for warmth and space during cold nights, their sweat and grime adding a thick, heavy layer to the air you breathed in. And permeating it all, the bilge water, sloshing unseen beneath the floorboards. A murky, stagnant mix of everything that trickled down. Stray food scraps, human waste from limited facilities, rainwater runoff, spilled drinks, fish guts, and who knows what else. This wasn't just a passing whiff you could escape. It was constant, a relentless, multi-layered assault on your senses, day in and day out, with no clean air to breathe deeply and clear your head. It was a smell that would seep into your clothes, your hair, your very skin, a constant, unavoidable companion of the journey. just one small, deeply unpleasant facet of simply existing in that ancient, unvarnished world, adding its quiet weight to the daily struggle for survival, far from any comfort. Beyond the constant assault on your nose and the ache in your muscles from cramped conditions, life on a longship demanded a very specific kind of resilience. You would spend weeks, perhaps months, just sailing. Picture it, the endless gray expanse of the sea meeting the gray sky, day after day, with little to break the monotony. The wind would howl a relentless, lonely song through the rigging, and the rhythmic creak of the wooden hull became the soundtrack to your existence. Time would stretch out, a slow, dragging crawl measured only by the rising and setting sun, the quiet splash of waves against the side, and the slow dwindling of your meager supplies. Boredom was a heavy cloak, a constant, low hum beneath the surface of everything. But this tedious waiting wasn't truly restful. It was a deceptive calm, because in an instant the world could flip. A sudden storm could descend, turning the familiar gentle sway into a violent, life-threatening struggle against towering waves and freezing spray. Or, after weeks of seeing nothing but water, the cry of "Land!" could bring not just hope, but the coiled tension of knowing what might lie ahead. Potential conflict, sudden, brutal violence, the stark reality of the raid you'd sailed so long to find. You had to be ready, always, to switch from patient endurance to desperate, instant action. That constant, gnawing edge of potential danger, mixed with the soul-wearying boredom, demanded a mental fortitude few possess today. And that tension didn't just come from the sea or the enemy ashore. Life aboard a longship, with dozens of men confined in a relatively small space, could be just as fraught with internal peril. The leader, your jarl or chieftain, held absolute sway. His word wasn't just law, it was the very breath you took. Disobedience, even perceived hesitation or incompetence at a crucial moment, could shatter the tense quiet like a hammer blow. Imagine the feeling of eyes on your back, knowing any misstep might invite not just a shout, but a swift physical correction. Perhaps the feel of rough rope across your shoulders, delivered without hesitation. Or worse, the chilling silence and the cold glint of steel that meant you had failed not just the leader, but the entire crew, who depended on your skill, your speed, your absolute reliability when the stakes were life and death. There was no negotiation, no appeal. If you couldn't pull your weight, if you showed fear, if you questioned the command in the heat of the moment, you were a liability. And liabilities on a ship sailing into danger, surrounded by men whose lives rested on collective discipline and individual courage, were dealt with instantly, brutally, and often permanently. It's a stark reminder that survival in this world wasn't just about fighting the enemy. It was about constantly policing yourself, living under an ever-present threat of internal consequence that modern life rarely, if ever, replicates. After days, sometimes weeks, of nothing but the vast gray expanse of the ocean, the biting spray, the endless creak of the timbers, and the constant smell of damp wool, salt, and restless men, there would come a moment. A shout from the mast, a figure pointing towards the horizon, and just like that, the ship would change. The dull ache of fatigue, the monotony of the journey, the quiet tension of self-policing, it would all suddenly coalesce into a single sharp point of focus. You'd strain your eyes, trying to pick out the smudge against the sky, the line that wasn't just another wave crest. Land, or perhaps more accurately in this context, a target. A different kind of energy would ripple through the longship. Not the quiet desperation of survival at sea, but the coiled readiness of anticipation. The low murmur of voices would fade as men checked the ropes on their shields, ran a thumb along the edge of an axe blade, or simply stared intently ahead, the sea tiredness momentarily forgotten. That surge of adrenaline wasn't just excitement. It was a profound instinctual shift. The senses, dulled by routine, would sharpen. The wind would still taste of salt, but the air felt different, charged. The rhythm of the waves was no longer just background noise. It was the tempo leading to something imminent. This wasn't home, warm and safe. This was the place where everything you had endured, every hardship on the sea, every internal struggle for discipline, would finally be unleashed. The quiet tension had found its outlet. The surge of adrenaline, the sharpened senses. They weren't just for the moment of landing, but for the crucial, quiet approach that came just before. As the land began to loom out of the twilight, or the pre-dawn gloom, perhaps just a darker, indistinct shape against the fading sky, the longship became a ghost. The sound of sails flapping was gone, replaced by the gentle, almost silent dip of oars being paddled with exquisite care. A low mist often clung to the water's surface, swirling around the boat, muffling sounds, turning the world into shades of gray. It was a shield, yes, hiding you from the settlement shore, but it also hid dangers, rocks just beneath the surface, or currents that could push you off course. The air felt damp, cool against your face, carrying the faint earthy scent of the land you were about to visit, perhaps even a hint of peat smoke if the wind was just right. Every Viking on board knew the stakes now. No talking, just hushed signals, or the low murmur of the jarl giving commands, barely audible over the quiet lapping of water. Your eyes strained, trying to pierce the mist or the darkness, scanning the shoreline for any sign of life, any unexpected light that could mean you'd been spotted. The damp wood of the boat felt cool and warm beneath your hands, steadying you. This was the time for the helmsman's skill to shine, easing the longship into a hidden cove or towards an unguarded stretch of beach, using the cover of darkness or fog like a cloak drawn tight. It demanded immense concentration, years of experience reading the water and the land in the dark. It was the silent, invisible dance before the potential roar, a test of patience and nerve before the blade was even drawn. The blade was even drawn. And now, as the longship glides ever closer to that unsuspecting coast, perhaps through the lingering tendrils of dawn mist or the deep cloak of night, your senses sharpen. The vast open sea is behind you, replaced by the growing presence of land, a dark, silent mass on the horizon, slowly resolving into the shape of cliffs or trees, looming against the faint sky. Listen closely in the hushed air. The only sound is the soft, rhythmic dip of the oars, barely disturbing the water's surface. Each stroke is a whisper, a quiet heartbeat propelling you forward in the near silence. The gentle lapping of waves against the boat's curved hull joins this soft chorus, a natural rhythm designed to blend seamlessly with the subtle sounds emanating from the shore itself. Take a deep breath of the cold, damp air. It's thick with the smell of the sea, the bracing sting of salt spray carried on the breeze, the rich, earthy scent of ancient wet wood beneath your hand gripping the gunwale. But mixed with these familiar ocean smells is something new, something subtle and perhaps unsettling, given the circumstances you find yourself in. Faintly, carried on the wind, you catch the distinct scent of wood smoke, a gentle, innocent smell, the aroma of homes, of breakfast cooking, or fires banked low for the night. A powerful, poignant reminder of the quiet, unsuspecting lives just a short distance away, across the dark water. The air within the longship crackles with a quiet tension, a coiled spring waiting to release its energy. Every shadow seems to deepen on the land ahead, every soft sound amplified in the heightened awareness of the crew around you. Your own heart beats a little faster in your chest, perhaps from the cool, biting air chilling your exposed skin, perhaps from the raw, stark knowledge of what is about to happen on that silent land. This hushed approach, filled with the subtle sounds and smells of the shore drawing ever nearer, is the fragile, potent calm before the storm breaks. And then, the gentle rhythm of the open sea changes. The deep blue water begins to lighten, shifting to a hazy green or gray as the seabed rises closer. A different kind of sound emerges beneath the familiar creak of the hull, a soft, occasional scrape. This is the sound of the ship's keel finding shallow water, perhaps brushing against sand or a submerged rock you pray won't pierce the wood. Navigating this final stretch, especially in the dark or fog, demanded sharp eyes and calm hands on the steering oar. There's no slow, steady pulling up to a dock here. These longships were designed to be beached rapidly. As the hull grinds softly onto the sand, there's a sudden urgency in the air, replacing the silent tension. Men scramble. Ropes are thrown to secure the ship as quickly as possible against the tide or potential counterattack. The air fills with low shouts, the thud of feet, the clink of metal. Then, the final step. Getting off the ship. Now hip. You might swing yourself over the low sides or leap from the bow or stern. The water is likely cold, shocking your legs as you splash into the shallow wash. The smell of wet sand and salt and damp wool fills your nostrils. Every second counts as you push through the water towards the shore, ready to plant your feet firmly on solid ground. This wasn't a graceful arrival. It was a swift, often chaotic rush from sea to land, a vital, jarring transition you had to make instantly. You scrambled onto the beach, maybe stumbling a bit as you pushed through the shallow wash, your legs cold and dripping. The sound of the waves receding back out mixes with a strained silence building in front of you. The smell of wet sand and salt is sharp in the air, mingling with the damp wool of your clothes. You take a moment, breathing heavily from the rush, your tunic clinging uncomfortably to your skin, wet from the knees down. Around you, other figures, equally damp and perhaps shivering slightly in the cool air, are doing much the same. They shake off water, tighten a belt, adjust a helmet strap, their movements economical and focused, each person preparing in their own quiet way. Your hand finds the familiar grip of your chosen weapon, perhaps a heavy axe or a long, sturdy sword. You heft it, feeling its weight, balanced and ready. A quick, almost automatic glance runs down the blade. Is it still keen? You feel the worn wood or leather of the grip, solid and reliable in your hand. Perhaps you check the knot on your shield strap, making sure it's secure against your arm, a vital piece of wood and hide that might save your life. You look up then, scanning the faces of the men standing near you, your comrades. Their expressions are grim, eyes steady and focused forward. There's no need for words here on the sand. A shared glance is enough. A silent understanding passes between you, a nod that says, "We are here. We do this now." The world seems to hold its breath in this moment. The air is thick with anticipation. The only sounds the gentle lapping of water against the shore, and the quiet, ragged breathing of men. It's the stillness of the coiled spring, the strange, heavy peace just before unleashing chaos. You stand ready. The stillness holds for just a moment longer, the quiet, heavy and profound. Then, it breaks. Not with a slow build, but with a sudden, jarring violence. A guttural roar erupts, perhaps from the throats of your leaders, perhaps from deep within your own chest. A sound less human than animal, raw and terrifying. The air, thick with anticipation moments ago, is instantly ripped apart by noise and fury. You are moving now, surging forward with the others. A wave of hardened muscle and focused intent. The smooth sand gives way to rougher ground beneath your feet as you rush inland. The first sounds from the community you've targeted aren't war cries, but startled shouts, then sounds of panic building, doors being broken open with brutal kicks or the sharp crack of axes on wood. The gentle lapping of waves is swallowed whole by this sudden, deafening chaos. You hear the terrified bleating of livestock, the confused barking of dogs, and then, undeniably, the first screams. Sharp, piercing sounds that slice through the morning air, shattering any semblance of peace. The air itself seems to vibrate with the sudden, brutal energy unleashed. This isn't a battle plan unfolding. It's simply terror, arriving without warning, crashing down upon unsuspecting lives. You are inside that storm now. And as the sounds engulf you, your hand instinctively tightens around the worn wooden shaft you clutch. These aren't ornate, finely balanced swords of legend. Your primary tools are simple, brutally effective instruments designed for maximum damage in messy, chaotic close quarters. Perhaps it's a heavy axe, its iron head chipped and scarred from previous encounters, weighted deliberately to cleave bone and split shields with a single powerful swing. You feel the rough grain of the wood against your palm, the cold, unforgiving metal at the top. Or maybe it's a stout spear, tipped with a broad, leaf-shaped head of hammered iron. This is for thrusting deep, for creating immediate life-ending wounds before anyone can get too close. There's a raw simplicity to these weapons, a lack of finesse that speaks volumes about their purpose. They are extensions of brute force, demanding strength and savagery rather than intricate swordsmanship. There's no time for elaborate tactics here. It's a swirling, terrifying dance of adrenaline and instinct, your survival hinging entirely on your ability to wield this simple, brutal tool faster and harder than the next person. The air fills with the sounds of wood on metal, metal on flesh, and the ragged breaths of exertion. This is the reality of the raid, stripped bare of any romantic notions, leaving only the cold, hard fact of the weapon in your hand. Your life, and the lives of others, depend on how you use it in the next desperate moments. And as you grip that weapon poised for the storm, the reality hits you. This isn't some organized duel or a clean line of battle you might imagine. This is chaos given form. The shield wall, that iconic Viking formation, is less about static defense and more about a brutal, grinding shove. Bodies press against you, sweat drips, and the air grows thick with the smell of damp wool, brine, and fear. When the walls meet, it's a sound unlike anything else. A tremendous, splintering crash of wood on wood, followed by the rhythmic, sickening thud of blows landing on bone and flesh. You're not fighting one opponent in the open. You're wrestling in a confined space, surrounded, pushed and pulled by the surging mass around you. Your vision narrows to the small patch of chaos directly in front of you, a swirling tangle of limbs and desperate faces. The shield wall holds only as long as the bodies within it can endure. When it breaks, and it inevitably does, the fight devolves into scattered, brutal duels. It's a desperate scramble, where tripping means almost certain death. The ground is slick with mud and blood. The noise is deafening, a mix of yells, groans, and the ceaseless clang of steel. There's no art here, only sheer, unyielding violence driven by the primal instinct to survive the next terrifying second. It's an exhausting, horrifying dance you were utterly unprepared for, and that exhaustion, it washes over you now, heavy and absolute. Your lungs burn with every ragged breath you snatch in the thick metallic air. The axe in your hand, once feeling mighty, now feels like a simple, unbearable weight, each swing a monumental task your body is suddenly ill-equipped for. Every muscle in your arms and shoulders screams a silent protest, but there is no time to rest. They keep coming, faces grimed with sweat and dirt, eyes fixed with grim determination. It's not one-on-one here. You parry a wild, desperate blow from the left, then instinctively twist to narrowly dodge a brutal jab from the right, all while trying to muster the strength for your own desperate, clumsy swing towards a third attacker. Every single movement, every block, every attempted strike demands a monumental effort you didn't know you were capable of, and yet, somehow, utterly incapable of sustaining for long. The sheer physical toll is staggering, far beyond anything your modern life has prepared you for. The terror isn't just a cold knot in your stomach. It's woven into the very fabric of this physical agony. It's the sheer primal fear that your body will simply give out before the enemy does. The cacophony of battle seems to recede slightly, replaced by the deafening sound of your own heartbeat pounding in your ears and the desperate gasps for air. This wasn't the glorious charge from the sagas. This is just survival. A desperate, draining fight for each agonizing second, where death feels less like an ending and more like the inevitable consequence of your failing strength. Okay, the immediate fury might subside, leaving you simply enduring. But the fight isn't the only killer out here. Swords and axes, spear tips and arrows, they tear flesh and break bone in brutal ways. Imagine the gashes left by a glancing blow, deep cuts that expose muscle and bone, or the sickening crunch of a limb struck square. The battlefield isn't a clean place. It's mud and blood, sweat and grit, and all of that finds its way into the open wounds. There was no understanding of sterilization, no antiseptic washes as we know them. The invisible enemies, the bacteria, would begin their silent, relentless assault almost immediately. Your body tries to fight them valiantly, but it's fighting blind. Soon, the edges of the wound begin to swell, turning an angry, fiery red. The pain intensifies, a throbbing, burning agony that spreads beyond the initial impact site. Then comes the infection proper. A thick, yellowish or greenish pus begins to seep from the wound, carrying a sickeningly sweet putrid smell. Fever often sets in, racking your body with chills and sweats. Sleep becomes impossible through the relentless pain and the internal war raging beneath your skin. A broken bone might never set straight, leaving you crippled, or it could pierce the skin, opening a door for infection that would prove fatal. A simple cut that we treat casually today could easily lead to gangrene, requiring amputation without anesthetic, a death sentence in itself, or simply overwhelming your system until you succumb. This wasn't the glorious death of the sagas. This was often a slow, agonizing decline, hidden away from the battle, in a smoky, dirty longhouse. Many who survived the shield wall succumbed quietly to the unseen killers in their own bodies in the miserable days and weeks that followed. Those wounds, those crippling blows or fatal infections, so often began with a moment in the shield wall where protection simply wasn't enough. For many who stood in that brutal line, there was little armor at all, perhaps just layers of thick, padded cloth, known as a gambeson. Imagine that bulk. Layers and layers of linen or wool stitched tightly together. It felt dense, heavy, perhaps a little stiff. It offered some cushion against a blunt strike, or might tangle a glancing blade, but it quickly soaked up sweat and rain, becoming a sodden, perhaps slightly musty weight against your skin. Some might have worn toughened leather. Think of thick, cured hides, perhaps boiled or treated to be harder. It offered a little more resistance to a slicing edge than cloth, feeling tough and unyielding. But a heavy axe blow would still transfer crushing force right through it, and a spear point, sharp and determined, could find its way through the seams or softer spots. It would creak faintly as you moved, a quiet sound in the chaos. The fortunate few wore May shirts made of thousands of interlinked metal rings. This was heavy, a significant weight on the shoulders, and could feel cool, almost damp against your skin on a chill morning. It would jingle and shift with every breath. Mala was good against cuts, the rings designed to deflect or break rather than allow a blade to pass. But it offered less protection against crushing force, and vital areas like limbs, the neck, or armpits were often left exposed or covered only by layers beneath. None of this offered the near-total protection of later plate armor. You felt every impact, every near miss. Your vulnerability was always palpable, a constant, quiet tension beneath the weight of cloth, leather, or steel rings. Even clad in those rings of metal, feeling the weight of your axe or sword, you'd quickly understand that surviving a Viking raid wasn't truly about being protected by armor. It was about participating in a whirlwind of chaos, where the rules you might expect from any kind of structured conflict simply did not exist. Forget lines of soldiers meeting neatly on a field. A A raid was a sudden, brutal eruption designed for shock and awe. You weren't there to fight a battle with agreed-upon terms. You were there to overwhelm utterly and instantly. Terror was your first and most effective weapon, as sharp as any blade. Imagine the scene. Not the ordered clash of shield walls, but absolute panic breaking out. People screaming and fleeing. Small houses burning with a crackle that cut through the air. The atmosphere thick with wood smoke and the sharp, metallic smell of fear. The sound wasn't just steel on steel, but shattering wood, distressed animals, and the relentless guttural shouts of your comrades pushing forward. Your job was not to offer terms or accept surrender. It was to push forward relentlessly, creating such overwhelming, terrifying force that resistance collapsed before it could even properly begin. Speed was paramount in this kind of violence. You struck hard, took anything valuable you could carry quickly, silver, goods, captives, and retreated before any organized defense could possibly form. There was no room for hesitation, no pause for thought beyond the immediate task of terrifying and taking. Surviving this kind of deliberate chaos demanded a chilling detachment, a profound willingness to participate fully in the terror you inflicted. It wasn't about bravery in a fair fight or upholding any code. It was about cold, brutal efficiency in a situation designed purely for disruption and theft. And that chilling requirement, perhaps even more than facing an enemy's blade, was the true, heavy cost of a day in the life of a successful raider. That chilling efficiency wasn't random. It served a very clear, very practical purpose. These raiders weren't primarily seeking glorious combat or land, at least not in these early raids. Their sharp focus was on taking value, quickly and decisively. Imagine the quiet chaos as they swept through a settlement. Their eyes weren't necessarily on facing warriors, but on securing tangible wealth. They sought easily transportable goods, finely crafted metalwork perhaps, or bundles of valuable textiles taken from storage. Then there were the precious metals, the glint of silver coins or broken pieces of jewelry quickly scooped up, their intrinsic value universally understood, a heavy, cold weight in a leather pouch. Livestock was another key objective. The gentle lowing of cattle, or the soft bleating of sheep, sounds utterly out of place amidst the terror, represented portable wealth, easily driven away. And then, perhaps most tragically, came the people themselves. Men, women, and children, captured and bundled together, their quiet fear a chilling counterpoint to the raiders' grim determination. These captives weren't seen as individuals, but as valuable commodities, destined for the distant slave markets, another form of plunder to be quietly calculated. This was the cold, transactional heart of the raid. This calculation of wealth came with immense, immediate risks far removed from the safety of your longship. Imagine, for a moment, being there. You are a tiny part of a small raiding party, perhaps a few dozen men in a strange village far from home. The initial terror of the locals might fade quickly, replaced by a cold, hard fury. The sound of an alarm horn, a distant bell, could shatter the quiet morning air. Suddenly, faces appear at windows, then doorways. What felt like an easy target begins to stir. The air could thicken with shouted warnings, angry calls to arms. You might find yourselves swiftly surrounded, the narrow paths and crowded huts you thought offered cover now feeling like a cage. More and more people emerge, not as passive victims, but as determined defenders, armed with whatever they can find: pitchforks, axes, heavy clubs. The odds could flip terrifyingly fast, or perhaps the locals retreat into their homes, barricading doors. Frustration could turn to desperate measures. Fires might be set, perhaps by the raiders themselves to flush people out, or perhaps by the locals as a desperate defense, hoping to drive you away or trap you. The smell of burning thatch, thick and acrid, fills your lungs. Flames lick at wooden walls. You could find yourself cornered in a smoke-filled building, the heat intense, the roar of the fire deafening. facing the grim reality of being trapped with no escape. The plunder you came for, forgotten in the desperate fight for survival. The fire might rage or it might be put out, leaving behind charred beams and the persistent bitter smell of smoke and fear. But even if you escape the immediate danger, the true cost of this day is only just beginning to settle in. The goal, after all, isn't just survival or even escape, but plunder. And taking things from people, especially those who resist fiercely, often involves unimaginable brutality, a raw violence that chills you to the bone. You might see things you never thought possible. The desperate struggle of people fighting for their lives, their homes, the raw fear in their eyes. You might hear sounds that will replay in your mind long after, cries and screams that aren't just fear, but the sound of everything precious being ripped away. And you might, if you are truly trying to live this day, have to participate in the violence yourself. The unexpected feel of a weapon connecting, the jarring shock, the sudden chilling stillness afterwards that feels wrong, profoundly wrong. This isn't like a practice skirmish back home. This is the sharp, ugly edge of necessity, driven by desperation and cold greed. The adrenaline might eventually fade, leaving you trembling, not just from physical exertion, but from the sheer, awful weight of what has just happened. The faces you saw, the sounds you heard, the things you were forced to do, they don't just disappear when the raid ends. They lodge themselves deep inside, heavy and sharp. Imagine trying to sleep that night, huddled amongst your companions, if you even get the chance for rest. The images flicker behind your eyelids with every exhausted blink. The sudden silence is filled with echoes that refuse to fade. This isn't just physical danger. It's a profound, soul-deep shock to your very being. It would fundamentally change you, perhaps in ways you wouldn't survive intact. Not whole, not the same person who stepped onto the ship this morning. The mind, like a fragile building, can be utterly consumed by such fire. Okay, the terrible roar has faded, replaced by a ringing silence and the low sounds of pain. The fighting, for this brutal moment, is over. But survival isn't just about the clash of steel. It's about what comes next, the desperate scramble in the aftermath. You are surrounded by the grim results of the violence. Splintered wood, scattered bodies, the metallic scent of blood hanging heavy in the air. Time isn't a luxury you possess now. The signal is given, perhaps a harsh shout or a horn blast. It's time to take what you came for and do it fast. Your heart still pounds a frantic rhythm against your ribs. Your muscles ache from the exertion of battle, but you force your hands to move. You scramble through the wrecked building, perhaps tearing open chests with crude tools or simply grabbing items strewn across the floor. You grasp anything that seems valuable, maybe rough spun cloth, some tarnished silver scraps, or a surprisingly heavy carved wooden bowl. The ground beneath your knees might be slick with moisture, perhaps rain from a leaking roof, perhaps something far worse. The air itself feels charged with risk, with the ever-present threat of a counterattack or unseen dangers. Every creak of a floorboard, every distant cry makes your head snap up, pulse leaping. You hear the panicked shouts of your companions urging speed, the rustle of cloth being bundled, the clatter of metal against metal as someone drops a heavy object. The smell of smoke might mingle with the coppery tang of blood and the damp earth. There's no careful selection, just frantic acquisition, shoving items into bags or beneath your rough tunic, eyes constantly scanning. Think about that pressure. The knowledge that staying too long means perhaps not leaving at all. The objects you touch might be warm from a life just ended, still holding the faint scent of a hearth fire they belonged near moments ago. It's a chilling reminder of the cost, a grim tax on your survival. And this swift, brutal collection is just one more layer of the day's grim reality you would have to endure, before the escape, before the long, uncertain journey home across the waves. You've made it through the raid, perhaps boarded the longship for the journey home. But what if you didn't leave completely unscathed? A glancing blow, a deep cut from a blade, or a heavy impact could leave you wounded, vulnerable. And here, the grim reality of the Viking world truly sinks in. Healing wasn't a gentle process. There were no antiseptics, no pain relievers like we know them. If you were injured, your options for care were incredibly basic, and often agonizing. They might try to bind your wound, using strips of rough linen or wool torn from clothing. Imagine that coarse texture pressing against raw, exposed flesh. A constant, irritating discomfort adding to the pain of the injury itself. Perhaps they'd apply a poultice, a makeshift compress of herbs, maybe moss collected from a damp forest floor, or even animal fat mixed with various plant matter. It would feel strange and perhaps a little warm against your skin, a clammy, earthy concoction that you hoped, desperately, might help, but you couldn't truly know. For serious bleeding, a far more terrifying method was often employed: cauterization. A piece of iron, maybe a knife blade, or a specially shaped tool, would be heated in the ship's small fire until it glowed red or white hot. The sight of that searing metal approaching your wound, the sickening smell of burning flesh as it made contact. It was a moment of sheer, unimaginable agony, meant only to stop the blood flow, searing tissue shut with brutal finality. And even after enduring such torment, the battle for your life was far from over. Infection was a relentless, invisible enemy. A wound could easily fester, becoming hot, swollen, and filled with pus. The sickness would spread through your body, bringing fever and chills. Gangrene, the dreaded dying of tissue, could set in, turning the limb black and cold. A chilling, often fatal outcome. There was little understanding of why wounds turned bad, only the terrifying knowledge that a seemingly minor injury could spiral into a death sentence. Surviving a raid was one thing. Surviving the aftermath, the body's slow, painful fight against unseen foes, was a different kind of brutality entirely. It adds another layer to the quiet dread that must have accompanied every journey, every conflict. Surviving a raid was one thing. Surviving the aftermath, the body's slow, painful fight against unseen foes, was a different kind of brutality entirely. It adds another layer to the quiet dread that must have accompanied every journey, every conflict. But the dangers weren't just in the quiet, creeping threat of infection or the wounds you carried. Even if you had made it through the initial chaos of the raid itself, perhaps grabbing some silver or livestock, the immediate threat was far from over. As your axe quieted and the smoke began to mingle with the sea air, eyes that had hidden away were now watching, assessing. The locals, shattered and terrified just moments before, weren't just going to stand idly by and let you vanish back into the mists. Beneath the surface of the raided settlement, a pulse of anger and determination was starting to beat. Perhaps a hidden horn started to blow, its mournful sound echoing across the valley. Or maybe the frantic, clanging peal of the church bell began to ring out. A frantic, desperate alarm carried on the wind to neighboring farms and villages. The signal was clear. Invaders were here, and help was needed, fast. This was the critical moment. The fleeting window of opportunity was slamming shut. The weight of the silver necklace, or the panicked bleating of a stolen sheep, suddenly felt like a terrible burden. Your attention snapped from counting your spoils to scanning the tree line, listening for the sounds of rallying resistance, the tramp of feet, angry shouts getting closer. There was no time to savor a victory that hadn't fully solidified. It was a sudden, desperate scramble back to the waiting longship anchored close to the shore. A chaotic rush over uneven ground, the spray of cold water as you waded out to the boat, muscles burning with fear and exertion. The dread of being the last one, caught alone on the beach as armed villagers streamed out of the woods, was a sharp, icy fear in your gut. Even a successful raid often ended not in triumphant leisure, but in a breathless, urgent flight, praying the oarsman could pull you back to the uncertain safety of the open sea before it was too late. Okay, so you've made it back to the longship, breathless, soaked, maybe clutching a stolen goblet or a bolt of precious fabric. But the work isn't over. There's no moment to collapse onto a bench and catch your breath. The beach behind you might still hold danger, and every moment counts. The ship is bobbing impatiently on the waves, a wooden beast waiting to be fed with the spoils of your terror before it can truly flee. Now comes the scramble to heave everything aboard with frantic haste. Imagine lifting heavy chests overflowing with coins and jewels, awkward bundles of cloth, sacks of grain, or tools you've snatched. You're working alongside equally exhausted companions, muscles screaming. The rough, salt-encrusted wood of the ship biting into your hands as you find purchase. It's a frantic, messy business, tossing things into the shallow hold with little regard for order, just speed. The air tastes of salt, sweat, and damp, ancient wood. Then there are the captives, not willing passengers, certainly. These are often struggling, terrified people, perhaps bound tightly with rough rope, adding a different, heavy kind of weight to the cargo. You might have to physically lift or drag them aboard, past the piles of plunder. Their cries or whimpers a stark, chilling contrast to the rough shouts and grunts of the crew. It's a grim, difficult part of the task, a stark reminder of the human cost of this brutal work you are part of. Everything must be done quickly, efficiently, under the watchful, impatient eye of the raid leader. There's the constant, low-level fear of dropping something valuable overboard into the cold, dark sea. Or worse, losing a valuable captive in the chaos. The longship, though a symbol of freedom and power, feels cramped and unstable as it takes on its heavy, varied load. This final, desperate phase on the water's edge is another intense layer of exhaustion piled onto a body already pushed far beyond its limits. And then comes the call, a sharp, urgent shout from the beachmaster, a signal that it's time to break the spell of the raid and get out. Your legs ache, your lungs burn. But there's a fresh surge of adrenaline as everyone scrambles towards the waiting longships. Feet churn on the wet sand, heavy with spoils or perhaps just exhaustion. There's a desperate energy in the air, a raw fear that the locals, finally recovered from the shock, might be gathering, might be coming for revenge. You heave yourself over the low gunwale, perhaps helping pull a comrade aboard, the wood rough and splintered beneath your hands. The boat rocks precariously as more bodies clamber in, settling amongst the piled-up goods, the bound captives, the gear. The air smells of salt, sweat, blood, and the damp wood of the ship itself. Shouts are lower now, more guttural, focused on the single task. Push off, get moving, escape. The longship is heavy, groaning as it's shoved out into the shallow water. Cold spray kicks up, soaking your worn leather boots. Oars are fumbled for, dropped into their locks, a chaotic symphony of wood on wood. Then the rhythm begins, ragged at first, then settling into a heavy, desperate pull. Row, just row, backs straighten and strain, muscles burning anew. You cast quick glances back at the receding shoreline, searching the trees, the hills, for any sign of pursuit. The fear hasn't vanished. It has simply shifted from the axe in close quarters to the potential arrow in the back or the vengeful mob on the beach. The shore gets smaller, the water deeper beneath you. The rhythmic splash of the oars becomes the dominant sound, a monotonous lullaby of escape. The open sea stretches ahead, vast and indifferent. There's a fragile sense of relief, but the tension remains coiled in your gut. You are back on the water, yes, but the journey home is long, dangerous, and fraught with its own set of silent, waiting perils. Just another day, if you can call it that. That vast, indifferent sea stretches out around you, seeming endless under a sky that might be clear and bright or heavy with coming rain. Your small boat, a tiny speck upon the swells, feels fragile, constantly bobbing, constantly wet. The rhythmic splash of the oars might continue, or perhaps sails catch the fickle wind. But the movement never truly stops. There's a chill in the air, even on a sunny day, a dampness that seeps into your clothing and settles deep in your bones. The constant scent is brine, salty, sharp, and pervasive. Then the sky might darken. Clouds gather with alarming speed, bringing a wind that whips the waves into a frenzy. Your sturdy longship, so fearsome in a raid, now feels alarmingly small, a mere toy tossed about by the ocean's power. Water crashes over the sides, filling the bottom of the boat, soaking you through with icy spray. The wood groans and protests with every pitch and roll. The howling wind screams through the rigging, a terrifying symphony that drowns out all other sounds, leaving you isolated with the fear in your gut and the sickening lurch of the deck beneath your feet. Surviving the storm is a matter of luck and seamanship, a brutal test against a foe that feels utterly indifferent to your existence. And even if you weather the gale, there's the silent terror of the lost. No map, no compass, just the sun by day, the stars by night. If the clouds persist, covering the celestial guides, you are effectively blind. The horizon looks the same in every direction, a flat, featureless line where sea meets sky. You could miss your home by 100 miles, drift endlessly, or worse, wash ashore in a hostile territory you never intended to reach. Meanwhile, the meager supplies dwindle. Hunger becomes a constant, gnawing ache, a dull counterpoint to the endless taste of salt on your lips. The journey home isn't just sailing. It's a long, wearying battle against the elements, against uncertainty, and against your own body's weakening resolve. Even if you survived the unpredictable wrath of the open sea, arriving back at your temporary camp or crowded settlement offered little true respite. Imagine stepping ashore, the salty wind still whipping at your face, and heading toward shelter. The air inside a longhouse, perhaps thick with the lingering smell of damp wool, wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and whatever simple meals had been prepared over the central fire. It's a close, heavy atmosphere. Sanitation, as we understand it today, simply didn't exist. Waste was often just disposed of near the dwelling, creating breeding grounds for flies and attracting vermin. Water sources could easily become contaminated by human or animal waste. And the food, even when seemingly abundant, was often poorly preserved, susceptible to spoilage, or infested with insects or rodents. Your diet, while perhaps hearty, would likely lack the consistent nutrients needed to maintain robust health. Now, combine these everyday conditions: cramped living spaces where illness could spread like wildfire, constant exposure to questionable water and food, and bodies already worn down by hard labor, cold, and intermittent hunger. This was a world where microscopic threats were ever present. A small cut from working with tools or weapons could quickly turn into a raging, deadly infection with no antibiotics to stop it. A simple stomach bug could leave you utterly dehydrated and incapacitated, far from any effective remedy. Diseases that we easily treat today, dysentery, persistent fevers, even bad colds, could sweep through a community with devastating speed, leaving people weak, unable to work, and incredibly vulnerable. There were no miracle cures, often only basic herbal poultices or desperate prayers. To fall seriously ill wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a very real, very frequent path towards being unable to contribute, becoming a burden, and facing a difficult, lonely end. Your survival wasn't just about facing human foes or the elements. It was a constant, quiet, unseen battle happening inside and around your body every single day. Yet the dangers didn't cease simply because you were on solid ground, back in your own fjord. Even within your own settlement, tensions simmered beneath the surface like hidden rocks. An old insult, a disputed piece of land, or a perceived slight against your family could ignite into a deadly feud that lasted generations. You learned to watch faces carefully, to recognize the glint in an eye that spoke of unspoken grudges. The air could feel thick with suspicion, a quiet threat more unnerving sometimes than open battle. Beyond personal scores, political struggles among chieftains and jarls were constant. Allegiances shifted like the tides, and finding yourself suddenly on the wrong side of a powerful leader could mean ruin, your farm seized, your family exposed, your place in the community erased in an instant. There was little formal justice, only power, and the protection you earned by reputation or alliance. And then there was the ever-present threat of famine. The land itself, though sometimes bountiful, was often stubborn and unforgiving. A harsh winter that lasted too long, too much rain rotting the seeds, or a blight on the barley could mean disaster. You might walk past fields expecting green growth, but see only stunted, yellowed stalks. The scent of wood smoke wouldn't carry the promise of a warm meal, but perhaps only the thin smell of desperation, of empty granaries and hungry bellies. Survival was a fragile thing, even here at home. Survival was a fragile thing, even here at home. But imagine leaving that fragile safety behind, stepping onto the deck of a longship, bound for unknown shores. While the idea of Viking raiding might conjure images of fierce warriors and quick riches, the reality for most involved an almost unimaginable level of physical hardship and exposure. We today are so unused to constant, biting cold or the ceaseless damp seeping into our bones. You step onto that ship, and the wind whips at you immediately, carrying the sharp, salty spray of the sea. There's no waterproof gear as we know it, just wool and perhaps leather, which quickly becomes heavy and cold when wet. Days stretch into nights on the open water, the boat pitching and rolling, your clothes never truly dry. The biting chill finds every gap in your layers. This isn't just discomfort, it's a relentless assault on the body. Your skin is chapped, your muscles ache from bracing against the waves, and sleep offers little respite on a hard, cold deck. The air itself is thick with the smell of sea salt, damp wood, and unwashed bodies. There's no escape from the elements. Nowhere warm and dry to retreat to, not for hours, perhaps even days. For someone accustomed to climate-controlled homes and soft beds, even a single day of this exposure, this grinding physical misery, would be an almost unbearable trial. It makes you appreciate the simple warmth and dryness of your own space, doesn't it? Beyond the bone-deep chill and the constant damp, consider what your Sonian sides would be up against. Your modern body, accustomed to a world where illness is often a minor inconvenience, where clean water flows endlessly from taps, and food is not only plentiful, but regulated for safety. That body is startlingly unprepared for the raw reality of a Viking age. Even a seemingly simple act, like taking a drink of water, becomes a quiet gamble with unseen dangers. That river water, that communal well, it might carry invisible passengers your immune system has no defense against, used as it is to relative purity. Your gut, used to filtered safety, would suddenly contend with things that could cause severe, relentless sickness. And food, often salted or smoked heavily, sometimes scarce, sometimes harboring parasites from imperfect cooking or preservation. That ache in your stomach might not just be hunger. It could be something far more sinister taking root, exhausting your system day after day. Think of a small cut on your hand from handling a rope or a tool. Today you'd clean it, perhaps ignore it. In this time, with no antiseptic wash, no access to modern medicine, that tiny break in your skin could become a raging red battleground, spreading infection relentlessly through your body. Your body, without the constant, unseen support of modern hygiene and healthcare, is suddenly fragile, vulnerable to 1,000 threats we no longer even perceive. It's a quiet reminder of how much our comfortable, everyday survival depends on fundamental things we rarely, if ever, have to think about. Beyond the unseen dangers, think about the simple competence required just to exist each day. In that era, you couldn't just walk into a shop and buy what you needed. If a tool broke, you had to fix it, perhaps even forge a new one from scavenged metal. If your clothes tore, you needed to mend them with thread you might have spun yourself. Your understanding of the natural world, the subtle signs of changing weather, the habits of local plants and animals, the flow of rivers, was not a hobby, but your lifeline. Imagine the simple act of finding food. You wouldn't rely on a grocery store shelf. You'd need to know which berries wouldn't poison you, how to fish or hunt, or perhaps most challenging, how to coax a harvest from often unforgiving soil, guided only by generations of hard-won knowledge and the rhythm of the seasons. The feel of that rough, unyielding earth in your hands, the uncertain scent of the coming rain. And then there's the ever-present need for basic self-defense, not just in battle, but the readiness to protect yourself, your family, your meager possessions, from anyone, anywhere. There was no distant police force, no security system. Your safety rested on your own awareness, your ability to handle a simple weapon, and the stark understanding that violence was an unfortunately common fact of life. These were not learned skills for a career. They were the bedrock of daily survival, skills most of us today simply do not possess. Beyond protecting yourself from others, survival for people in the past, especially in a harsh era like that of the Vikings, meant simply enduring the world around you. Our modern lives are insulated. We have climate control, soft surfaces, and the constant, miraculous presence of hygiene and medicine. Step back into that time, and your body and mind, conditioned by modern comfort, would face an immediate, relentless assault. Imagine the pervasive dirt, not just dust, but the sticky, clinging grime of daily life without easy access to soap or clean water. The smell of wood smoke and unwashed bodies mingled with animal waste and rotting food would be a constant, heavy presence in the air. Minor cuts and scrapes, things we barely notice today, could fester quickly, aching reminders of the ever-present threat of infection with no antibiotics to hand. And the pain, chronic aches from hard labor, joints protesting the damp and cold, the relentless sting of insect bites. Simple sicknesses, a fever, a bad cough or stomach trouble, lacked the easy remedies we take for granted. They were serious threats, capable of dragging you down without the sophisticated medical support we rely upon. Enduring this constant, low-level physical and sensory discomfort, coupled with the very real danger of illness, would make even a single day feel like an unbearable test of endurance for a modern soul. Beyond the constant physical discomfort, the aches and the threat of simple illnesses dragging you down lay an entirely different kind of challenge for anyone attempting a day as a Viking raider. The sheer, unremitting psychological shock. This wasn't the adventure often depicted in tales. It was a life steeped in unpredictable, brutal violence. Imagine the sudden, jarring shift from a quiet sail to the chaos of a raid. The air fills with screams, the guttural shouts of combatants, the terrifying sound of steel on shield or flesh. You would witness horrors your modern mind is utterly unprepared for, sudden, irreversible death, and grievous injury happening right beside you. There were no safe zones, no moments of predictable peace once conflict erupted. This exposure to trauma wasn't a rare event. For a raider, it was a recurring, central part of existence. There was no concept of psychological support, no quiet space to process the terrifying things you saw and did. You simply had to steel yourself, bury the feelings, and remain perpetually alert. The lack of any guaranteed safety, the knowledge that violence could erupt at any moment, anywhere, whether in battle or a sudden feud at home, would create a constant, low-grade anxiety. Your mind, accustomed to structured safety and emotional processing, would likely buckle under this relentless, unacknowledged strain and exposure to trauma. Beyond the constant gnawing strain on your mind, consider the demands placed upon your body every single hour of every single day. You likely know the comforts of a warm, soft bed, reliable heat, and nourishing food readily available whenever you feel a pang of hunger. Now, gently let that comfort fade from your thoughts for a moment. Imagine instead the pervasive, bone-deep chill that seemed to cling to everything, even indoors, especially during the long, dark northern winters. Your clothing was often rough wool or animal hides, smelling faintly of smoke and dampness, rarely offering true warmth. Sleeping was typically done packed close with others in a smoky longhouse, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and livestock kept nearby for the little warmth they offered. Your rest was probably poor, punctuated by coughs, snores, and the rustling of straw beneath you. Minor injuries, cuts from tools, bruises from falls, aches from constant labor, were simply part of daily life, with no sterile bandages or soothing antiseptic. They would ache persistently, perhaps become infected, and you just had to bear it. Food was often scarce and monotonous, perhaps some thin gruel, dried fish so hard it could break teeth, or rough, heavy bread. Even simple movement required navigating uneven, muddy ground, carrying heavy loads, or performing relentless physical labor. Your body had to be incredibly resilient, constantly accustomed to discomfort, pain, and sheer physical exertion without complaint. The ability to simply keep going despite cold, hunger, and untreated ailments was on a scale we can barely comprehend today. It wasn't just about being ready for battle. It was about the exhausting, quiet grind of simply enduring existence itself. This constant, low-level physical suffering would likely break you, long before you ever saw the sea. But the breaking wasn't just physical. It was a fundamental chasm between their world and ours. A vast, unbridgeable difference in mindset forged by endless hardship. Imagine the sheer lack of comfort. Your clothes are scratchy wool or rough linen, likely damp, never truly clean, carrying the smells of wood smoke, animal skins, and unwashed bodies that permeate everything around you. The floors beneath your feet are often cold earth or rough planks, uneven and splintered, offering no respite for tired limbs. Every moment away from the fire's immediate warmth felt like a quiet, persistent battle against the seeping chill that seemed to live in the very air. You never felt truly alone or truly private. Small spaces were shared, often teeming with other life, both human and vermin. The constant, low hum of discomfort was the weary soundtrack to existence, punctuated by animal sounds, the creak of wood, and the ever-present whispers of wind or rain outside the dwelling walls. And then there was the quiet, underlying terror